All right, this is devlog 1, I guess, of the Bevy Game Jam 5 series. This is a couple days into the jam. Jam started on Saturday. Today is Monday. So it's been about, I guess, 3 days now. I didn't get a lot of time to work on the game on Sunday. So really what you're seeing here is the work from stream on Saturday, plus a little bit, and then a little bit of work on Monday. This is going to be a totally unscripted overview of the game and kind of where it's at and what I'm doing with it and what my plans are. So I guess a good place to start is by showing kind of where it's at currently. This is a debug view of the game currently. So there's a character, there's collisions. We can play the animations for the character controller and things happen and whatnot. And when you stop running, it stops and jump on platforms and stuff. This is not going to be a platformer. The theme is cycles. And for me, I chose to do basically like a laundromat version of Overcooked is the TLDR. I don't know how far I'm going to get. For me, game jams are very much a kind of go outside of your boundaries and learn something new. I know if you are trying to win a game jam or other people who participate in game jams will go for something that is well within their skill set so that they can produce the entire game in a week. I kind of do the opposite and I take on a whole bunch of things that I don't know how to do, which means that what I end up with is very different. So I'm using a couple of crates that I'm not going to talk about today because a bunch of them are, or some of them are unreleased and they're not mine. So if you happen to catch them, just kind of, you didn't see anything. I'm not supposed to show them to you. I'm just choosing not to. So it's not a big deal. So that was my debug camera for the moment. If I comment that out and we go with the real camera that I was working on, the kind of viewport that I'm going for is an isometric game for this 3D game. And I chose 3D very intentionally because if you're following my streams, you know that I'm working on this like 2D game. And that 2D game is isometric, it's tile-based, it's got a couple of patches on top of Bevy, a couple of patches on top of Bevy ECS tile map. And I'm really interested in seeing like isometric perspective from a 3D viewport so that I can kind of compare and contrast the 2D and the 3D. So this is the same scene with the different camera. You can see that we've got depth of field on the camera going in and out. That is not your eyes. You didn't leave your contacts in. And then we've got our character running around and whatnot. I don't have directionality on the character yet. We'll talk about why. But we do have the little animations here. We do have the collisions and everything. So overall, for the amount of time that I've spent on this and the new things that I've used, I'm pretty happy with this. There's a lot to do, obviously. First of all, since we did mention the camera, this is not actually an orthographic camera. This is a 3D perspective camera because I specifically wanted the depth of field effect to come through. And I have just a system animating the depth of field in and out for testing, which is why it's like getting fuzzy and then not fuzzy. I think not being able to use depth of field on orthographic cameras is a bug or just a user error, but I wasn't able to get it to work. So instead I pushed a perspective camera way far away and basically zoomed it way in. So let's talk a little bit about the crates that I'm using. Bevy Inspector GUI, you can see here on the left, super useful. We're using a bunch of GLTF stuff. So if I click into a bunch of these, I end up seeing things that are being exported effectively from Blender. So this is like a floor and a cube and whatnot, and it's got all the components. Bevy Inspector GUI is super useful. Highly suggest it. You can see here that if I want to test something really quickly, something like, hey, what if it was like ridiculously bright? I can just change the illuminance or darken it or do whatever I want here, which is really nice. You can see that if I really crank it up, the bloom kicks in. So the camera has the bloom effect on it, which is more subtle when the light is accurate, but is quite nice. A nice addition, I think, down at the lower levels. But this is a really nice debug tool. I can change the color of the light. I can do whatever I want. And this works for any entity with a component or a resource or something that has reflection enabled and is registered in Bevy's type registry. So anything we want to do here, we can definitely do. I can turn HDR on and off so you can see how this is no longer powering bloom, I believe, because you have to have HDR on for the bloom. If you turn HDR on, then the bloom kicks in. Super useful for debugging purposes for all sorts of things. So that's Bevy Inspector eGUI. I'm using Bevy Asset Loader and IS Progress to load assets. This is very straightforward usage. It's setting up a loading state, loading things, tracking the progress, and then letting me know when things are loaded. That's it. This is basically straight out of the example from the Bevy Asset Loader repo. If you go to Bevy Asset Loader, you go to examples and you go to, where is it? Progress tracking. What I have here is basically this exactly. So if you're interested in doing that, this is it. I like Bevy Asset Loader a lot, especially for loading in a bunch of different stuff and being able to access it later. Kind of gets rid of, you know, any boilerplate that I would need for the vast majority of things, especially for quick game jam stuff. Now, I also have a bunch of config flags here. So in my own cargo toml here, you can see that I've got these features. We've got default dev. So dev is on by default. I've got this long loading. I've got with main menu and things like that. So if I want to do things like cargo run features long loading, then I can run this, it will build. And then what happens is that the game will actually take a really long time to load the assets on purpose. In this case, it's only like 4 seconds or whatever. So it's not super long, but it gives me a better idea of what it'll look like. I don't have any of the loading screens enabled right now, so it just took a while and then popped into the game. But it's a similar thing with main menu. So if I turn main menu on or off, it'll either pop me into the main menu state or the in-game state. Doing things like this is really nice because it allows me to either work on the main menu or skip it entirely. And then you can see like the long loading state here kind of turns on a fake really long task that takes a couple seconds in addition to all of the regular assets. Bevy Asset Loader, highly suggest it. IS Progress, if you want to track progress for whatever reason, I tend to. Bevy TNUA is one of the other things that I'm using here, and it's one of the things that I've spent most of the time on. I think it's worth its weight, but if you go into the examples here, there's a demo. If you go source, bin, and you go to one of these, 2D, 3D, shooter, like whatever, this file is the entry file for Platformer 3D. And you can see there's like a ton of different flags in here. Make this a little bigger for the video. There's a ton of different flags in here. So like if you're using Avian 3D or Rapier 3D or eGUI or whatever, and these are scattered all over the place. So this file ends up getting to be like 400 lines of code, and there's a bunch of components that are added, and there's some comments, but you have to like go through all this, read all the comments. And that's not even the only file that you have to look at to be able to use this system. So it's fairly complicated, and understanding everything that's in here takes quite a bit of time. Platformer animation system is like 200 lines. The control system, if we go look at that, is like another 500 or something like that. So there's a lot going on here. You have to read about 1,000 lines of code if you want to get a good overview into what Bevy TNUA is. But if you do get through all of that, you are rewarded with something that can kind of run and animate and do a couple of actions by default. There's also dashing, and you can control the height of the jump, and you can crouch and crawl and all these other things that are really nice to just have. So it's a worthwhile investment in my mind. I just kind of wish that I had invested that time before this game jam, because it took quite a while for me, and it's still going to take me some more time in addition to that. But once I know it, it'll be super useful moving forward, I think. Avian 3D is where all my colliders are coming from. So you can see the debug colliders are turned on. That's the orange lines in the game right now. Avian is super nice. Have nothing but great things to say about it. It is super useful, and I enjoy it a lot. Highly suggest Avian 3D, Avian 2D, depending on what game you're making. So that brings us to some of the more experimental crates. So we've got this main and lib setup. My main has nothing in it. My lib has some plugins and the camera spawning. And then I've got this game scene that I was working on stream on Saturday. So it's got, you know, some scattered stuff in it. Basically, on stream, it's hard to keep a bunch of code organized in a bunch of different directories, especially if you are learning new things. So this is kind of messy in that sense. But we're spawning in, you'll see here, blueprint info from a scene.glb, which is a GLTF file, but in a binary format. And there's a couple of other components here. This is a crate called blenvy, BLENVY. It is not released yet. It is in a pre-alpha state, and I am pulling it down from GitHub to use it effectively. So definitely not something that I would suggest using just yet, but it's a very exciting tool. So this piece of code is the most important thing. When I run my game, it writes out this registry file, which we'll talk about in a second. And in my art assets, what we have is a couple of blend files. And in my assets directory, we've got levels, blueprints, and not audio, and materials. So there's a bug in materials right now. It's not creating that GLB file. I need to look into that after this video. But levels and blueprints are working extremely well. So what does that mean? That means that if I've got my little character here and I hit a button, you can see that this just grew a little bit. And in the logs, you say finalizing blueprint instance, whatever. So this is a blueprint of a cube that just got spawned above the other cube. And why is that interesting? Well, it's because all of that is coming directly from Blender. So blenvy is both a Blender add-on and a crate that you can use in your Bevy apps. And this is my scene here. So it's got one really big plane. That's the plane that we saw in the game. And then we've got a cube here. So the plane, this whole ground area is the plane that we see in that scene. And then the cube in the center is the other cube from that level. And then this cube right here, the one that my character is standing on at the moment, is actually spawned in manually. So we've got a combination of things that I spawned in manually that are not Blender related, alongside a whole level that came from Blender, alongside a cube that I can spawn on command with a key code. That's all coming from Blender. So we've got this scene here on the right-hand side. I don't know how to make the Blender UI bigger, unfortunately. So we're just gonna have to live with it being a little bit small. We've got a collection here with a cube and a floor. And then we've got a second scene that I'm considering the library, which is just like another cube. This is the cube that we spawn in on the key press. This is the level, so to speak, which is just basically another blueprint that you can spawn in dynamically. When I want to add arbitrary components to the things that I'm building in Blender, I just look at this list and I go, hey, you know, maybe this needs a background color. So I add the background color and then it comes up with a little editor, you know, sRGBA. Maybe I want this to be red. And then I would save this. It would write out to the GLB file and I would have it in the game. Now, this component doesn't make sense on a cube and there's no way for Blender to know that. So I'm just going to get rid of that. But you can see like Avian 3D right here, collider generator, and this is a half space, which is the plane. It's actually an infinite plane with the normal going upward in the Y direction. And then I've got a static rigid body on the plane. I've got this collision grouping thing, which we'll talk about in a second because that's very fun. Same thing for the cube. It's got a collider generator, but it's a cuboid this time instead of a half space, whole bunch of options. And the default Blender cube is 2x2x2. So we're using that for the collider that we're going to spawn in. And then again, this collision grouping thing, which I have two values in an enum for environment and player. And this is sick. This is awesome. This is so cool. I cannot say, I can't describe how excited I am for this working. I've seen hot reloaded materials going from Blender into my Bevy game. I'll try to put up the snippet of that video on screen right now, if I can remember to do it and find the video. But again, this is in a very pre-alpha state. This is something I'm using that's off of GitHub. I'm actually building my own zip for the Blender extension at this point out of that repo. So it is not for the, we'll call it the faint of heart, as it were. It is definitely for people who are okay with things not working and going in and fixing them. One thing that I've found really useful for working with blenvy is this pattern of, so for example, collision layers, right? Collision layers are a concept in Avian where you can define groups of things that interact with other things and don't interact with other groups of things. So in this case, what I've done is I've got this enum, which is a game layer. It's got player, enemy, and ground, which I took right out of the example. And we just derived physics layer for that. And you can see there's a component called collision layers that we need to construct, which has game layer ground for the membership that we're in, and then enemy and player for the groups that we collide with. Now, if I take that component and I try to insert it inside of Blender, which is collision layers, this is actually like a bit mask. So this is like numbers here that don't have any like semantic meaning to them, right? Because it's like a bit field effectively, like wherever the bits are in the number is what group you're in. This is obviously very hard to work with from a UI perspective. So what I've done is I've created this collision grouping enum, which has environment or player. And then on top of that collision grouping, which you can see here, environment and player, I've implemented component hooks. So in Blender, I add this collision grouping component. And in Bevy, whenever I spawn in something with the collision grouping, this hook will run for the on add. It will get that collision grouping, match the value of the component, and spawn in the corresponding collision layers that I've defined for that grouping. So now I get a nice little UI in Blender, and I get the collision layers that I wanted inside of Bevy. And then I remove that collision grouping right at the end. So I can define as many groups of these as I want, as many ways as I want, and it provides a nice little UI for selecting that inside of Blender, which is great. I've actually started a file here of blenvy helpers that do basically the same thing. And again, I will say my TNUA controller animations. So this is the file that controls all of the animations. All of the code that I've written is about 1,000 lines so far, and this file alone is almost 400. So again, TNUA, definitely a trade-off, I think. So that's blenvy. Blenvy is awesome. Super excited for that release. I'm gonna do some more videos on it when it actually gets released for real. I think it's a really exciting addition to the ecosystem, and I'm happy to be using it in this project, even though it is pre-alpha only from GitHub. A couple more crates that I do anticipate using. I'm not using Leafwing Input Manager right now, but I am going to implement that very quickly after this video. This will be fed as input to Bevy TNUA. So I'll have Leafwing on one side, basically Bevy TNUA in the middle, and then my animation graph stuff on the other side, powering the animations, and it'll all work out really nicely. For audio, I'm going to use Bevy Kira Audio because that is the reigning audio plugin at the moment. And then I might get into this Kinetoscope plugin. If we look at this, this describes itself as an animated GIF player or GIF player for Bevy, and it also plays WebP. So this is very cool. Might use this for some loading screens, that kind of thing. And then there's crates that I'm using for like UI and stuff that I'm not going to talk about because they aren't ready to be talked about yet, which is why we skipped the whole main menu and all of the UI. But I'm having a ton of fun doing this Blender stuff. I'm having a ton of fun getting everything ready to go. I'm very happy with getting the isometric perspective with the depth of field and other effects that can be in here. I'm going to do some debugging for blenvy after this video, and then I'm going to start building a little world for this thing to be in. I think I only need to build one level, realistically. Again, I talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but it's going to be kind of like overcooked for like a laundromat. So it's going to be like clients coming in, you have to serve them, you have to put the clothes in the right laundry machines, you know. Again, the theme is cycle, so it's like spin cycle, wash cycle, you know, how you would do laundry. And we'll see where I can get. I don't know what this is going to end up with. Again, using a couple of pre-release plugins, doing some things that I'm not really comfortable doing, like the Bevy TNUA stuff. But for me, the Bevy Game Jam is an opportunity to learn and get to use some new things. So that's what I'm doing. And that'll be my short devlog. I don't know how long that's been. Probably will cut down into about 10 minutes or so, hopefully. But it's been fun so far. And I've got another like 6 or 7 days to work on this. So I'm about, you know, like a day and a half's worth of work in, which I'm pretty happy with. If you're participating in the Game Jam and you have your own devlog, let me know, because that's what's going to go out in This Week in Bevy next week, which coincidentally is why I didn't get anything done in the game on Sunday, because I was doing This Week in Bevy work. But if you're participating, let me know what kind of game you're building. Let me know what you're working with. What crates are you using? Is there anything that I should be on the lookout for? Anything that I should use? Anything that should be, you know, anything you want to share? And with that, I'll leave you to the next one. I don't know when I'm going to make the next devlog video for the jam. We'll see. At the very least, I'll be streaming on Saturday again. So we'll see how far I get before then, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day.